Sorry, I'm Gene Lee. I'm the chair of the Capital Financial Planning Subcommittee of the district. I'm going to call that meeting to order. I know that there are other groups that need to call their groups to order, so I'll go around this way.
Yes, Jeff Hubbard, Chair of the Hamilton Board of Selectmen. I've called Hamilton Board of Selectmen to order on Wednesday, January 29th.
Dave Langer, Chair of the Hamilton Finance and Advisory Committee, calling that obscure body.
All right, well, good evening, Alex Began, and I'll call the Wenham FinCom meeting to order as well.
Okay, thank you. Just so you know, we also have some, this is a subcommittee meeting of the district for the school committee, so we do have other members of the school committee in the audience who are not part of the subcommittee, but they are obviously part of the full committee, so just be clear. So we have a packed agenda tonight. I think everybody has a copy of it. I think we should just get started. First thing would be the FY21 operating budget overview. And I believe we're going to start with the town of Hamilton.
Before we jump right in, I do have just a couple of intro slides just to ground us and some of the work that we did at our last meeting together. So if you... Last time we came together, we talked about establishing a collective purpose for our joint budget meetings. And we all agreed that we wanted to come together to improve communication, improve transparency, and to collaborate and work together so that as two towns and the school district collectively, we can best serve our community. I don't know that that was our exact words, but I believe that was the intent of our purpose for coming together. Would anyone like to add anything to that based on our last joint meeting? No? Okay. We also took a look at some norms that we could use to guide our work, and these were the 5 agreed upon norms, and I just want to take a moment to remind us of those as we guide our work today. So the first was to take an inquiry stance, to be hard on the content, in this case, and maybe the numbers, and soft on the people. To share the air, which means that no one person is using up all the air time, that you're stepping up and then stepping back after you've had a chance to share your thoughts. Being kind, specific, and honest, and assuming positive intent.
So our objectives for this joint meeting is to listen to the school department's FY21 budget goals and challenges for each of the communities. We're going to share our FY21 leadership team's tentative operating budget. We will also listen to both towns and share our capital budget and what drove the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District and the towns of Hamilton and Wenham to present their capital budgets, and to clearly articulate the reductions and reallocations within our level service budget, and also to develop and work together to garner community support.
And then up first, Joe, I'll pass it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll try to be brief. I know we have a lot to cover tonight, and really what we want to do is just kind of provide share our perspective on the budget here. So the FY21 budget guidance and drivers, you'll see up here, we have a number of challenges that we have in the year ahead. We've worked with our department heads to develop a level services budget. We're currently projecting just under $1 million total revenue growth for over FY20, projecting increases in uncontrolled costs like workers' comp, health insurance premiums. We've established salary reserves for 2 union contract negotiations, and negotiated salary increases from 3 settled contracts. I'd note that currently on the town side of contracts, we're in the 2 to 2.5% range, mostly 2. We do allow in 3 of the contracts for merit increases based upon positive evaluations, and we have 2 union contracts that will be negotiating something similar, but we are really in the low end of providing increases in our contracts for our employees. Seeing some increases in charges for joint programs with Wenham, which is fine because overall those programs add to our community and save us from doing them alone, but there's still increases that we have to deal with. We have financial reserves policies that require us to make mandatory minimum appropriations to stabilization funds, which limits our use of free cash. And the total projected town budget without the schools, and this year is $14,133,220, a 2% increase over FY20. That is, that's done intentionally. We have financial constraints we have to try to live within. 2.5 doesn't let us just do everything we want to do. We're projecting less than 56,000 growth in local receipts and just 20,000 growth from state aid. We are projecting tax levy growth of $922,000, almost $923,000. And total projected available revenue in FY21 without an override would be $33,628,620. That's without an override or use of free cash for operating costs. For FY21, we are projecting a decrease in our scheduled debt service, which helps. The town did develop a capital improvement plan for a 5-year capital improvement plan, and the first year plan's requests totaled almost $2.5 million. That capital plan was then turned over to our capital committee, which has prioritized it. Given the constraints of 2.5, we know we're not going to be funding $2.5 million of requests this year. The impact of a proposed budget of the, I'm rushing along and I don't mean to. The impact of the proposed FY21 budget, the school's proposed FY21 budget, currently, that proposed budget represents an increase in assessment to the town of Hamilton of $2.375 million. And if you look at the average home value in the town of Hamilton at around $613,000, that would equal $832 increase on their tax bill. That increase represents more than twice all the anticipated revenue increase for the town of Hamilton. And that increase would absolutely require the use of free cash, all available levy capacity, and a Proposition 2.5 override. In order to be fiscally responsible and not use all of our reserves and levy capacity, we're projecting that we could possibly afford a 5% increase for the schools over FY20. Early projections on that kind of increase, which would be about a $750,000 override, would be approximately 45 cents per thousand increase on the tax rate. The override itself would be $256 on that average home value. The $19.2 million assessment would equal $934,000 increase over last year, and about $12,000 more than the projected revenue growth, and $313,000 more than the town is projecting its budget to grow. I'll let you just look at this, this slide for a minute. It just provides a little bit of historical context. If you look across at the last several years of budgets, the actual school budgets to what you're projecting in this year's proposal, current proposal, in the last 5 years, the budget would have grown by almost $10 million. The school department budget would have grown by almost $10 million in the last 5 years. Now, that's not all Hamilton's responsibility. That'd be shared between the towns, but that's still, our whole budget's $14 million this year, so you will have grown by almost our budget in 5 years. The town of Hamilton requests of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District that you work openly with the towns on a unified budget message, that you remove or reduce non-mandated and non-contractual costs. Look for other revenue streams. Can you pay for things with fees? Recognize that the schools get a bottom line budget. We don't want to be out arguing about jobs or effect on kids. We want to share with you that, and the communities, that the schools have needs, but it needs to also respect that the towns also have limits. And no matter what happens, no matter what number we arrive at, you get a bottom line budget. So us debating teaching positions doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, you get your budget and you do with it what you want. And that's the way the state wants it, and that's the way it should be. But I don't want to get into arguing about positions over this. Help the towns develop a tiered approach to proposing a budget at town meeting. And we can talk more about that. Recognize that the current request is not possible without going to the voters. It is not sustainable in the long term. It is not realistic within the confines of Proposition 2.5. Remember, we can probably help you with 5% over last year without going to an override. Beyond that, our hands are pretty much tied, because we can't go beyond that and be fiscally responsible. So. Sorry to be the downer at the evening. I think we have one last at the back. Just to make you all aware, Hamilton, the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom meet jointly on Monday night. At that point, myself and the Finance Director and our department heads will present our FY21 budget proposal for town spending. It currently includes your proposed number, so we'll be discussing ways around that. Over the next few weeks, based on what the school committee approves for final budget, we will work to structure warrant budget articles and/or override requests as we all come to agreement on. But, you know, I'm just trying to be honest up front with you. And Julie, we've talked about this. Anthony and I met many times with you. If my tone seems a little harsh tonight, I want to be clear. We've worked very well with the superintendent and the finance director in the last several months. It has not at all been combative. I'm not trying to be combative tonight. We're just trying to be honest.
Yep.
It's a fiscal reality. 2.5 is the law for us in Massachusetts, and we're trying really hard to abide by that. So we hope you'll work with us on it.
Definitely. Do we want to hear all three presentations and then do questions at the end? Okay. So up next, we'll pass the mic over to Anthony to present when it's operating.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Anthony Antaldi, Town Administrator for Wenham, for those watching at home. Pleasure to be here tonight to give you our outlook for FY21. We have three sources of revenue. The property taxes, we can only raise property taxes 2.5%. With receipts, then we have state aid. Some property taxes, again, here's another Joe, the historical budget. So in FY21, we started out with prior year tax rate just over $60 million, adding at 2.5%, just over $100,000. Our new growth, we're actually projected to decrease on our new growth of $70,000, so that's going to be $150,000. This gives our total levy limit of just shy of $17 million, $16.7. Our next category is local receipts. Some local receipts are admitted. We absolutely conservatively budget local receipts. Most communities do, because what local receipts are, where we get the most of our money is from or the excise tax and building permits. Sure. So we don't know what people's habits are going to be. We don't know what the economy is going to be. So we do conservatively budget on local receipts. With that, for FY21, our number that we're using for our total local receipts is just shy of 2.7, is that 2.6 million dollars. Next slide, we get money from the state. It's called state aid. So we have, and this, I know the governor just came out with his preliminary estimate cherry sheets, but it's estimates. So right now, we went with our numbers, which are slightly lower, admittedly, to what the governor has. But somewhere, what the governor has and what the House and the Senate come to is where we'll end up. But right now, we're projecting for our cherry sheet receipts of $465,000. Now we have offsets to those, a few of the offsets, the largest one being the MBTA. Second largest one, that's about $115,000 for Wenham. The next larger item is the mosquito control project, which is $27,000 to $28,000. And then we have a few smaller ones like MAPC for $2,000 to $3,000. So what we expect for a net state aid to be at $255,000. So our total revenue, when you add up those three categories, comes to just over $20 million, $136,000. Now, we have a category called reserve for abatements or overlay account, and that's for abatements on real estate. So we estimate there at $195,000. We have transferred from other available funds in at $7,500. So our total revenue that we're projecting is just shy of $20 million. So the next slide gives you a visual of what this looks like for our revenue. So that large blue portion of the circle is all the property tax. So approximately 84% of our total revenue in Wenham comes from property taxes, followed by local receipts, and as you can see, state aid really is just a small little blip. Expenditures. What we did here is we budgeted for a 3% increase on the schools. We asked our town departments to level service, but unfortunately, everything does go up. So one of the things, even in the general government, which is the town administrator, it's the Board of Selectmen, it's the FinCom, it's finance, the largest increase on that was legal fees. Beyond our control sometimes, unfortunately. So our total departmental expenses this year is $21 million, and just over $21 million. So the next slide gives you that visual, which should be really no surprise to anybody, and this is for every municipality in Massachusetts that has a school system. The school is the largest part of the budget. In Wenham, it's 53%, followed by public safety, and then followed by our public works, and then employee benefits, which is health insurance and retirement. So in summary, what's that look like? Our revenue, again, what I said before, it was just shy of $20 million, 19.9. Our expenses right now are estimated to be 21, just over 21, which creates a deficit of $1.1 million. Right now, we're plugging in the use of free cash. Nobody wants to do this in Massachusetts. It's not one of the best practices, but unfortunately, Wenham has very little alternative, I think. So, and this isn't a policy that yet has been made by the Board of Selectmen and FinCom, but we're using $400,000 of our, we have $954,000 in free cash, of which our policy says we have to retain $250. So we have 700, just around 700,000 to use. We're using $300,000 for our capital, which we'll hear about later, a little bit over 300,000. So that $400,000 I'll plug right now. With that, though, we still have a deficit of $729,000. And again, that's with 3% for the schools. So what's the impact on the tax rate? So the next slide, it has a scale on the left with the current at $18.94 per thousand, and then it goes up 4, 5, 6, 7 to $750. So right now, that number that I said we were at $729,000 for a deficit, that's going to put Wenham's tax rate next year at about $20.30. Now, the next slide is the impact on a tax bill. So our median assessed home value, for a median assessed home value of $574,100 with a $729,000 override, we're looking at about approximately a $775 increase per year on the tax bill. So the next slide, what we have is that just shy of 12.5% school proposed tentative budget. So what impact does that have on Wenham? So the next slide. We plug that number in, our deficit climbs, the available balance per the budget climbs to just over $2.2 million, using $400,000 of free cash. That still creates a deficit of $1.8 million. What's the impact on the tax rate? The next slide. The impact on the tax rate, Wenham's tax rate will jump to $21.56 per thousand. What does that look for a tax bill? So again, based on that median assessed home value of $574,100, that bill can expect to increase just over $1,500 per year for a $1.8 million override, based on a 12.5%, just shy of 12.5% school number right now. that's basically it. As you can see, I don't expect the future to change for Wenham unless we have new revenues, unless we have fees, unless we have some kind of economic development. This is how it's going to look right now. So the future is, what you're seeing is just add 2.5% and retain the departmental budgets at status quo. So that's our situation where we're at.
All right, so I'd like to say that we have better news to share than the town of Wenham, but we do not. We also are in a deficit. When I took the job in July, one of the very early communications I received was this same communication that I know folks have seen, and we've been trying to talk about this publicly in every opportunity that we have. But our July 18th forecast that we received from the outgoing Assistant Superintendent of Finance showed a $638,000 deficit. Now, the good news is that this included projections for a 7th kindergarten teacher, which became a reality, a 3rd preschool teacher, which became a reality, and 2 teaching assistants, which are required by law once you reach certain ratios in preschool to be in the classroom. So that is the good news. It does also include over $500,000 of out-of-district, unbudgeted out-of-district tuitions and transportation. These are things that we don't get to choose to do. We do these because it's right and best for students, and it's also mandated by law. So if there could be good news in this number, that is the good news there.
So after about 6 months through the year, me, Julie, and the entire leadership team met and went through line by line through our budget. And for our December 31st forecast, we updated it for a projection of approximately $446,000 deficit. The main difference between the July forecast and the December forecast is mainly due to new salary agreements with district administration and the fact that the business office did reduce an FTE and reallocated the payroll position and broke it up between our new HR position and our new district accountant position. This saved approximately $140,000. This also combined with the fact that the special ed office withdrew part of the forecast for tuitions. They reduced it by approximately $100,000. This reduced our total projected forecast to be approximately negative $450,000. Now, after we met with the leadership team, we all kind of took this a little personal and didn't really think this was acceptable. So everyone went through line by line through their budget, and through the hard work of the team, we were able to curtail approximately $200,000 in expenses. This is mainly due to supplies and materials. The leadership team went through their stockpile and went through line by line and decided that they could maybe put off the ordering of these materials until a later time, possibly next year. This resulted, again, in about a $200,000 savings, which now makes our deficit approximately $233,000. At this time, our circuit breaker reserve is just over $300,000, so we believe we'll be able to bail ourselves out and end the year right at zero.
So before we get into talking about the tentative budget, I just want to acknowledge that we are very cognizant of the pressures that are on both of our towns. And we knew from the time that we presented the tentative budget that this number was not going to be the final number. We, as a leadership team, wanted to create a budget that clearly articulated the needs of the district, because one of the things I have learned in my short time here is that we've been pushing off and neglecting several aspects of our school system, namely the care of our facilities, but also the development of specific programs that will cost money up front, but will save money in the long run and will increase the quality of services that we're providing students. So I just wanted to acknowledge that up front, and we know that this is not sustainable. I've said this publicly multiple times. I never would have thought that I would ever be presenting a double-digit increase on a school budget. and the entire leadership team shares that concern. We know that the communities are not going to support this, and we know that we have a lot of work to do, and we've already started some of that. But we will talk tonight about the process of how we developed this leadership team budget, 'cause I'm very proud of that process. One of the things we heard very early on was that people want the process to be more transparent. They wanted it to be more collaborative, and they wanted to know what was in this budget and what is not in this budget. And we think that we've done a really great job in communicating that in a variety of different ways. And so we've presented the same numbers and the content of this budget in some visuals and presentations, and then we'll walk you through some of the handouts that we've made for you today too. So I can proudly say that this truly is the leadership team's budget. This is not my budget. This is not Vinny's budget. We've worked collaboratively with our team to deeply understand what are the needs of our students and how can we most efficiently and effectively meet those needs. So with that said, we had several budget goals. I'll highlight a few here. First and foremost, we wanted to make sure that we were developing a needs-based budget, that we weren't instead backfilling our students' needs based on the budget that existed, but building it literally from the ground up. I'm not going to say it was a zero-based budget, because no school system really does that, but it was line-by-line analysis and saying what is right and best for our students. We also wanted to make sure that we were prioritizing our resources pre-K through 12. And so this was the entire leadership team in a room for multiple days, looking at every aspect of the budget. And even though we have several unmet needs, we wanted to make sure that the needs that were going in the budget really were prioritized and shared. Of course, we're always working to provide required and appropriate services for students. Our demographics are shifting, our student needs are changing. School does not look like it did even 10 years ago. Students are coming with some very significant individualized needs, and it's our job as a public school system to make sure that all children receive a free and appropriate education. We also have to respond to the increasing enrollment demands at the pre-K level and then at kindergarten, and those kindergartners will now move up to first grade. So this year we have 6 first grades and we have 7 kindergartens. All of those 7 kindergartens are going to progress up to first grade next year. So in your mind, you could think that teacher would follow that cohort of kids. What we don't know yet is what will our new kindergarten cohort look like. Will we have 150 kindergartners again this year? So we need to be prepared for that. We also wanted to make sure that we were maintaining existing programs. We have heard that people move to Hamilton and Wenham because of the schools. And the conversations I've had with community members, I've asked, what do you love most about Hamilton? What do you love most about Wenham? And oftentimes the schools come up as a top priority or as a cherished asset to our communities. So we wanted to make sure that we're maintaining existing programs and ensuring student safety across the board. We also want to be able to expand early intervention and supports and services within reason. We know that we won't be able to do it all this year, but the research is really clear. Early intervention is about 8 to 9 times more cost effective than waiting till later on in a child's education career to intervene. So the fact that our preschool enrollment is up is a good thing. That means we're able to meet those students' needs earlier, which will improve their life outcomes, but it also is most cost efficient for us as well. And then, of course, we have to support our most precious resource, our 300+ employees. This is the largest portion of our budget and our most valuable resource. So we need to make sure that they have the support and services that they need to be successful.
So the 2 biggest challenges we faced in developing our FY21 budget are the first 2 bullets here. Those are the biggest drivers. The first one being the unbudgeted FY20 needs. So again, this includes the additional 7th kindergarten teacher and the 3rd pre-K teacher and the additional approximately $400,000 in out-of-district tuition. All these things don't go away in FY21, so right off the bat, we have to increase the budget by approximately 2.3% to make up these funds that were not budgeted in FY20. The second biggest one is our contractual obligations. Our biggest individual group is obviously the teachers. In FY21, it was almost a perfect storm of events. There is a new salary lane that was added for a master's step 15, and we had an unprecedented amount of teachers apply for salary advancement. This has increased our overall salary lines and has resulted in approximately a 4.9% increase. Again, we are seeing an increase in enrollment in our pre-K through 1 student population, and we are also seeing an increase of developmental, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of students, which requires specialized services and placements. And our facilities are continuing to age, and we are not keeping up with our routine maintenance costs. And we are filled with leadership team recommendations for new investment proposals that we are unable to support.
The other thing that's kind of unique about the budget, FY21 budget, is we only have 2 retirements this year. So we could imagine in the next few years that we'll have higher levels of that, but we don't have that breakage that we usually experience like we did FY20 to 19 to 20. So I'll give you a high-level overview. You all know these numbers, you've seen them. Remember, this is the tentative budget. This isn't the final budget. We've already put in a lot of hours in working on areas of refinement, but want you to see both the gross operating expense increase, the offsets, the revenues, and then the net. And this is really unique. Typically in budgets, your net budget is lower, your percent increase is lower than your expenditures, but in this case, our expenses are outpacing our revenue source. So, and this is an indication that we have a significant revenue challenge, which you all know because the large part of our budget is, the majority of our budget is funded by local taxpayers. We just don't receive a lot of state aid and have very limited ways to generate other sources of revenue.
So this chart kind of properly reflects what the increase on FY21 would be if you looked at the reality of FY20. So this includes all the additional teachers that we had to hire this year, the additional $406,000 in out-of-district tuitions, the proper classification of our IDEA grant, and the increase of $107,000 in special ed transportation. These are all things that are our FY20 reality. So if you take these into consideration, and our FY20 budget should have had an increase of about 9.15%. It was 5.6. If this was the case, we would be presenting to you a budget more in the line of an 8.8% increase, not a 13.
So again, what we're trying to highlight with this is, the reality that we're living in is not what was approved by you as the voters. And although you approved a 5.6% last year, it was very evident right after the vote was approved that that wasn't going to meet the needs of the students. And so what we're trying to do here is present to you what will actually do the job so that we're not starting the next fiscal year in a deficit again, because we won't have circuit breaker reserves to fill the hole next year. And that's an important thing for us to think about. That has been a pattern over the last several years, but we're at this tipping point, if you will, where we no longer will have that option after FY20. And we need to be really mindful of that. So, as I mentioned, a lot of work has already begun to reduce the tentative budget to a range that might be more acceptable by our 2 towns. Our capital financial planning subcommittee has spent lots of time with us refining the FY21 budget and developing models to represent percent changes over FY20 in these 3 categories. We have the too high category, which we know is the tentative budget that we presented to you. That's the leadership team's proposal. The mid-range would be about 9.4% to 10.4%. I know this still is a high number, but we believe that this is the most doable given the deficit and the current needs of our students, known needs of our students, I should add. And then in our minds, the too low range would be that 7.5% to 8.5%. And what we've done for you in this packet here on the very last page, so the other supplemental packet that the school committee created, we took this guidance from the school committee, and Vinny created this color-coded model so you could see exactly what would happen if we were to hit anything ranging from as low as a 2.5% increase over the FY20 approved, remember, this isn't over the reality, budget, all the way up through the 12.5%. And I don't know if you want to speak to it more specifically, Vinny.
So about each point that we drop is worth about roughly $300,000. So you can see as you go from 12.5%, we would see a reduction of approximately $145,000 off of our tentative budget. If we were to come in somewhere around 9.5%, we would be looking at a reduction of approximately $1,021,000 off of our tentative 21 budget.
So just to put that into context for you, when we're looking at FTEs, it's not because that's necessarily where the reduction would come from, but you can quantify one full-time professional staff member with salary and benefits at about 80,000. Some are higher, some are lower. So that's what that FTE professional staff reduction category is showing you. And if you were to look at this school, the Bucher School, the whole entire budget for the Bucher School is about $2.2 million. So when we start to get down into the 5.5% to 2.5%, 3.5% range, you're talking about closing an entire elementary school. That's what we would have to do to reduce the budget by that much. And a couple things to think about. Where, if that was even possible, where would we put the kids? We don't even have space in our other schools to do that. And if that were possible, what would that mean in terms of staffing, right? So just trying to give you some context for when you look at that, like what does that actually mean in terms of the whole school budget? And the other thing I'll just add as you're thinking about this is our entire discretionary spending accounts, so that's like supplies, materials. If you were to add up everything, including like toilet paper and cleaning supplies, it's about an 8 to 10%. It's about 8 to 10% of the total budget. So again, the majority of our budget is people and services, direct services to students. We don't have a lot of fluff in the budget in terms of the discretionary accounts. And we'll show you some visuals on that later on. So we can kind of tuck that away. We can come back to it and ask more questions about that. One of the things I like to clarify is the difference between level service and level funding. Level service is not the same thing as level funding. And those of you who have been looking at school budgets, you know this, or looking at town budgets, you know this, but these are two words I hear used and confused all the time. So level service is having the exact same level of service that we have now, which doesn't mean that the budget would be level. The budget would go up with a level service budget because we have contractual obligations and we have to take care of our personnel. Our level service budget that we're going to show you isn't just closing the doors in June and opening them up in August. It includes a very intensive line-by-line analysis that was done in one-on-one meetings with Vinny, myself, and either the principal or the director that's responsible for that budget. So I want to make clear that, you know, we aren't just rolling the numbers over and adding a certain percent to it. We're really digging deeply and seeing where can there be reductions, where can we reallocate, in addition to identifying the current needs.
So our level service today, we kind of divided up into three major categories. First one is our contractual obligations, like we previously said, is going up accumulates up to approximately 4.9% of our increase. This is our COLA, which for the teachers and custodians and office personnel is between 2 and 2.25%. This accumulated up to approximately $430,000. In addition to that, we've seen a drastic increase in our health insurance enrollment, which is showing an increase of $377,000. We have the proper classification of the IDEA grant. In all of our agreements, most of our employees are entitled to step increases as well. This accumulates up to $292,000. And again, the lane changes are $164,000. Our Essex retirement contribution was increased by approximately $62,000. And per the teacher's contract, we had to add an additional $10,000 for tuition reimbursement. These major contractual obligations listed here, there are others, but these are the big players, account for approximately 4.9%, like we previously stated. In addition to that, our annual rate changes, these are things like our utilities, our transportation, and some of our equipment, like our AEDs, are licensed out. This accumulates to approximately a 0.5 point increase. And again, our current services over FY20, the items that we are living in a reality today and were not included in the budget. Again, the special ed tuitions at $406,000, the unbudgeted special ed transportation at $107,000, and the addition of the kindergarten teacher, pre-K teacher, the 2 TAs, and the SRO that will now be on our books for FY21. In addition to that, we found that the district assistant treasurer was not budgeted for, and the additional SLP for 0.15% FTE. All these together account for just about an 8% increase over FY21.
So this next tool is included in your supplemental packet. It's also in the slides, and we're going to walk you through how the budget was developed. So we start here with level service, and now we've all been reminded that level service does not mean level funding, right? We have those drivers that Vinny just spoke about. And so this really, this isn't just, again, us rolling the books over into the next fiscal year and counting those contractual obligations. This is us going through and doing that line-by-line analysis with each of the folks responsible for their portion of the budget. But we don't just stop there at that line item analysis. We then look for retirements, we look for other types of personnel turnover if we know that somebody's not coming back next year. And we really, rely on the principals to be working with their staff to identify these things. This year we have 2 retirements. That's a really low number. Could we possibly have more turnover throughout the summer? We may, but this is what we know of to date. So this shows you, on the top line there, that's our gross expenditures, right? And so that's 9.73% change over what was approved in FY20. Again, not our living reality. And then the bottom line takes into account revenue. And so you're seeing the dollar change from FY20 approved and the percent change from FY20 approved. So we're starting our true level service refined starting point before considering any new information in terms of changing student needs is 9.71%. We then do have several investments that are required. These are things that are either compliance-driven, mandated, or have a safety implication, and we add those items here. So one of the things we're trying to avoid is the same situation we're experiencing right now, where we have known unknowns in terms of student needs, and we don't budget for them. This accounts for all of our known unknowns. So these are students who we currently have, who we know are going to need programmatic changes or a different level of service than what we're currently providing, or we know that they're transitioning from one phase level to another, and so a program may need to be created in order to retain that student in their home district, which we always want to do because it is always going to be more cost effective, and I also believe best for students when we can meet their needs in the least restrictive environment, which should be their home district whenever possible, right? And so this here shows you the impact on the gross budget and the net budget when we add those required compliance measures. Now, this also is strategy. Here, we were able to reduce part of our contracted services line in our special education budget by bringing on or budgeting for a full-time behavior certified analyst, a BCBA. This would allow us to double the amount of service hours we're providing to our students and decrease the cost to the district. Because right now, we don't have that employee in district. We contract that service for 19 hours a week at $130 to $180 an hour. We can, for less money, have a full-time employee who shares our mission, who shares our values, who's in our district, and who can begin doing some preventative work with our staff and students for about 10 grand less than what we're currently spending for that half-time work. So that's one example of what's in here, and it's required because if we don't hire the person, we then have to contract the service. And we're trying to find the most efficient way, most cost-effective and efficient way for us to meet the needs of our students. So those are the types of things that are here in this required investment portion. There's also little things in this, like $4,100 to buy a set of risers for one of our elementary schools that actually has a back on it because students keep falling off the back and getting injured. That's something we can avoid. We don't have to, have students getting hurt in that way. That's included in these required investments. Another thing that's budgeted in here, in addition to the tuitions and the BCBA and those risers, is $12,500 for transporting our students to off-site athletic facilities. This is because our facilities are often, our fields are often unplayable at points within the season, and we have to send our children to another place in order to be able to practice and or compete. So those are the types of things that are here. And as a leadership team, everyone was able to submit proposals, and they had to think really deeply about what they were asking for and what the return on investment would be, and also what would be the possible funding sources. And out of all of those proposals, we then sorted them as a pre-K-12 team over multiple meetings, and we said, what's the highest priority? And we looked at what's the biggest return on investment? How are we going to get the biggest bang for your buck, if you will, and what is the most critical need? And this, hands down, across the board, with every single school and district leader in the room, was our number one priority. And I know this is not the first time you've heard about this, but just to give you some stats. So we added that 7th kindergarten. Our kindergarten classes are still about 22 kids per class. With the exception at Cutler, we've intentionally kept those class sizes down to 19 because they don't have any supplemental support for their kindergarten classrooms. So the Department of Education recommends an 18-to-2 ratio, so 18 students for 2 adults in every kindergarten classroom. We currently have like 20 to 22 students with 1 certified adult. I polled a couple of my colleagues just on the North Shore and asked, is there anyone else who does not yet have teaching assistants in their kindergarten classes? And the answer I got was no. They all have them, but their class sizes are 22. And I said, okay, and so are ours, and we don't yet have teaching assistants in our classrooms. So just to give you a handle on that. Again, when we talk about early intervention, at the end of last year, we knew that about 30% of our kindergarten students were not yet reading on grade level. We all know how important it is to master literacy early on, and we believe that by adding these teaching assistants to the classrooms, it'll allow the teachers to give more differentiated and individualized instruction to our students, and therefore increasing the number of students leaving kindergarten on grade level and then progressing through the grades more ready to access the curriculum. So this, hands down, was our number one investment, priority investment. This would put 1 teaching assistant in each of our 7 classrooms, supporting those kindergarten classes. The second highest priority was a district-wide licensed social worker. I'm sure if you know anyone who's in education, you've heard about the increasing demands of mental health and behavioral health needs of our students, the social-emotional supports that they're requiring. This person would provide consultation, collaboration, and direct services to students while also helping connect our families to resources within our communities and in surrounding communities. If we're going to really maximize our, 8-to-3 investment in terms of the education that we're delivering our students, we need to make sure that the families have the support that they need to do their part of the job. And so this is also one of those things I was referencing when I was saying that education doesn't look the way it did 10 years ago today. The needs are really different, and the way we respond is really different. So this was the number 2 investment, and this is something that would impact all grade levels. The third investment, this is little money, but it's a new investment. We don't currently have after-school academic support for our high school students, but we do have a late bus. And so one of our leadership team members came up with the idea of being able to have a certified staff member who could support students through a cycle. They'd be identified and help them close academic gaps so they could then be more successful in their traditional school programming. And we would use that late bus so it wouldn't be an impact on families. This also provides for snacks for the students because we know that they would need to eat something to continue to stay focused. And the fourth investment is to increase a part-time speech-language pathologist. So currently in the FY20 budget, this was a .55 position. We increased it to a .7 position because we were having such a hard time filling it. We weren't able to find somebody who wanted that would fill it part-time and that was qualified. Our hope is that by increasing it to a 1.0 position, we'll be able to fill this position. And again, it doesn't mean that kids' needs aren't getting met. They're getting met. They're just getting met through a contracted service. And so again, we're paying about $130 an hour for someone to come and deliver this service to our students. Hands down, all day, every day, it's more cost effective for us to have our own person. We get more hours and we get better service for our kids. We do believe that in the next round, we'll be able to fully fund this at a net budget cost, or net neutral budget cost, actually with a savings, because we had a resignation and we're reallocating a position to that. So once we vet that with the leadership team, I'm sure we'll be communicating more of that with you. So that was the red line. You saw the red line on that slide. That's where the leadership team said, okay, this budget, we can't ask for any more things in this budget, any more investments in this budget, but we know that we have more needs. So I just capture them here for you so you can see the other types of things that were being asked for, who they were proposed by, what department. If it was an FTE, you see that there in that column, and what the amount requested was. So the one that's crossed out there, the equipment for the new biotech class, we're very proud to say that our ed fund funded this for us completely. So it was an unmet need in our budget, but now it is not, because we were able to seek that alternative funding source, and we're grateful for that.
So what we have up here is just a pie chart to kind of illustrate what our overall gross operating budget consists of. The tentative $39.3 million is divided up into 7 major categories here. Personnel accounts for 60%, while benefits like our health insurance and fixed charges is another 13%, and our out-of-district tuitions is 12%. These 3 categories alone account for 85% of our budget and are pretty much predetermined and mostly out of our control before we even got here. All the contracts were already in agreement and the staff was already in place. So 85% of the budget was already in place. Of the $4.3 million gross budget increase that we have asked for in our tentative budget, you can see who the main drivers are. 21% of the $4.3 million is comprised of teachers' COLA and staff salary changes. Another 21% of the $4.3 million is due to the increase in out-of-district tuitions. And again, another 18% is because of insurance, retirement, and other fixed charges. These 3 categories alone make up just under 60% of the total $4.3 million increase.
So just bringing you back to this again, we know that we're asking a lot of the 2 towns, but we are trying to avoid what happened this year. When we have known needs, we need to budget for them. Not budgeting for them doesn't make them go away. We don't get to decide to send the kids home, because we don't have enough money in our budget. We have to make it work each and every year. And so just want to remind you again that although you approved a 5.6% increase, the reality of the needs is a 9.1% increase over FY20. And so our actual budget that would be proposing, had we had an adequate budget in FY20, would be more in the healthy range. And this would include those new investments that we spoke about. And we'd be making big incremental improvements to our school system and not just holding the bottom line. And so again, just reminding you of the overview.
So again, this is just to give you kind of a breakdown of the assessment. After all of our gross operating expenses, we remove our expense offsets and our revenue sources, and we're left with an approximately 32.9% FY21 budget. This is an increase of a net assessment to the towns of approximately $3.7 million. And as you can see, the increase to Hamilton would be approximately 2.3%, or an increase to them of 12.6%, and an approximate 1.4% increase to Wedham, or 13%.
So our refinement work has already begun. We had a cabinet meeting, which is all of the executive leadership team, on Monday, and we meet with our full leadership team tomorrow to begin to vet the different ways that we can get to the mid to low range with having the least impact on the classroom. So again, in that chart, it shows you kind of compared to FTE, what would be the impact, but know that that's never the first place that we start, and that would be the last resort, depending on how low we think we need to go in order to get the support of the communities. I've been calling this a correction year because there's a lot of significant things that have all come to a point between FY20 and FY21. This is not the expectation year over year moving forward. The leadership team has full understanding of that. We certainly understand that as the superintendent and assistant superintendent. The other thing I've been asked is, well, so can you promise that next year, if this is the budget this year, can you promise that next year will be whatever range to whatever range? And here's the hard thing I have to say, just being honest. I can't really promise you anything except that the school budget is always going to go up. So long as we have people serving people, there's going to be volatility and there's going to be increasing needs. When we look at our young people who are coming to us, their needs are very, very different. And we have to be able to respond in a way that helps them thrive and helps them realize their own full unique potential. And that takes resources to do that. With all that being said, we still want to be really fiscally responsible and understand what our communities can support. So a couple of things working in our favor is that this is a contract negotiation year. So all 3 of our collective bargaining agreements expire June 2021. So that gives the school committee a little bit more control over what they negotiate next year, as opposed to this year where it's the final year of the contract. We've already made a promise and a commitment. So that gives me a little hope. Given that we only have 2 retirements this year, I'm really studying the HR data and saying who else might be ready to retire in the next 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. Once we have some more clarity on that, we can look at that as a projection that will certainly, the fewer people you have at the top of the scale, the more manageable the budget is. And we have a very veteran staff. We're very fortunate to have a lot of teachers who have been here 20, 25, 30 years, which says a lot about the communities, but it also says a lot about our school system. So those are some of the things that give me hope for the years coming. Plus, we're doing a lot of deep work around studying literacy at the elementary level and studying whose needs are we meeting well in the district and whose needs who could we be serving better? And that is, those 2 big projects are resulting in a lot of information that I think will change some behavior and adjust some of our practices. The tricky thing about schools, unlike a business where oftentimes people say you got to spend money to make money, for us, you got to spend money to save money, right? We have to develop programs in district to keep our students here so that we're able to meet their needs better in a more cost-effective way. And so this budget allows us to make some of those preventative incremental investments while also managing the current known needs of our students. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the school budget.
Questions.
Sure.
I know this is not a popular idea, but it's affecting everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way that we could negotiate that people pay a little bit more for their health care, seeing as that's a real driver? I know it's happening in all the businesses, and I was just wondering if that was a possibility.
Yeah, so that's a contractual obligation.
Okay.
So the perfect time to negotiate that is in the next contract cycle, which is coming right around the corner. And that could be a choice that the school committee makes.
Okay. And do you have a grant writer? Do you have anyone who's stepped up? Because I know that there are grants out there that could really contribute toward our bottom line. So I was wondering, do you have plans for
So we don't have a grant writer, but we are always looking for any creative funding source that we can find. We do have folks in the district who write grants. I know, for example, well, of course we write federal grants and the local state aid grants and things like that. We have applied for an Essex County Learning Communities Grant, and so we just received that, which we think is going to help us address some of our multi-tiered support system needs that we have in terms of that work, and it also allows us to collaborate with some of our community members. I don't yet know what the financial rewards of that will be because we're still in the process of like collaborating and developing that. So that's one grant that we just earned this year, which is really exciting.
Yes.
We did apply for the Kaleidoscope grant that came from the Department of Education. We were not selected. What we find is often that, like particularly in education, a lot of these grants are geared toward communities that have higher incidence of socioeconomic challenges and or English language learner needs, and we have those needs here. They're just not at the percentages that allow us to qualify for a lot of those types of grants, but we're always looking, and if you come across something that you think we may qualify for, let us know.
Okay, thank you.
For sure. Yeah, but we don't have a devoted position to that.
I noticed that there are about 400,000, I thought it was an increase in out-of-placement costs. What is the total out-of-placement cost?
For FY21, it's projected to be $4.9 million. $9 million.
4.9 million. And how many students does that serve?
That would be about 70 students.
70?
So we do have a disproportionately high number of students out of district, placed out of district, compared to other communities our size.
The total transportation, I note again, the increase was about 100 and something, but what's the total transportation cost for out of district?
For special ed, it is $770,000.
Thank you.
Hi, Rosemary Kennedy from the Hamilton BOS. I have a couple of questions, just because this is pretty daunting. And so I have two questions. I think my statement, first of all, is what's required and what can be done in an ideal world. But we're talking about these astronomical increases that are just, in many ways, impossible. So I'm sort of a common sense person, and I like to think that there are many ways that a lot of these expenses can be met using volunteers. And I will give an example of something. In fact, when we came here last month or the month before to appoint a new member, one of the things that I was very impressed about was the high school peer-to-peer tutoring. And so my question is, say a $7,000 after-school academic support program, which you say is peer-to-peer tutoring, sort of help people to catch up on things. Why would you not think about cutting that particular expense and using that program of peer-to-peer? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is this cost for the kindergarten TAs. You know, I think it's all well and fine to say, well, we'll just pay more money for this, but what about tapping into the community for these teaching assistants who you say would help with the reading deficits that 30% of our kids that are not reading at grade level? And so, again, in an ideal world, you would want these relatively highly paid people to come in who are certified, but is there an opportunity to get some community volunteers who will come in and help to defray? I mean, it's $301,000. I mean, I know I would be happy to come in and help tutor some little kiddies, help them with their reading skills. But I think realistically, you have to think about sort of out of the box, different ways of solving these problems other than saying we just need to keep throwing in money. So those are my two questions.
Sure. So we love volunteers. We have lots of volunteers in our schools every day. The tricky thing about volunteers is that, A, they volunteer, and we need someone who's going to be there 180 days every morning, from the start of the day to the end of the day. And that's a hard thing for some folks to commit to. Doesn't mean that there aren't some folks who would and could. Right? So that's the tricky thing with volunteers. And we're talking about students' privacy and students' needs. So it also has to be someone who understands FERPA and confidentiality and HIPAA and all those laws that protect our students' private information. And so that's another piece. Doesn't mean it can't be volunteers. We would create a training program, and we could certainly do something like that. So that's definitely something worthy of exploring. I think the biggest challenge is the consistency for the kids, right?
You don't know until you explore it, right?
And then the peer-to-peer piece, the challenge that we have is that after school, our kids are busy. They go a lot of different directions right as soon as the final bell rings. Again, we put this on there as a new investment priority, but we're also already exploring other ways. If it wasn't funded, how could we be meeting the needs of our students and being creative with the existing resources? And so that's true about anything that's in the budget. We're always saying, is there a more financially efficient way for us to accomplish the same goal?
I think just to sort of make a final comment, I know what people want to speak, but also thinking about, people want the best education for their kids, but on the backside of that comment is we can't afford to keep paying taxes. As I can't believe how many times I hear that. I'm shocked by the fact that my tax bill goes up in what seems an arbitrary way sometimes. It just keeps going up without any sort of understanding that there is a finite possibility. And in finances, I have 3 jobs. A lot of people who have kids in town, they're working, full-time and then some, both parents. But there are grandparents you can tap into, or aunts. It just seems like this is the reality for the future, because we just cannot continue to say, well, we'll just pay this. And I'm willing to do my share, so sign me up for one of the volunteer positions.
Gotcha. Thank you.
A couple comments from our side, if I may. So, first off, thanks for your remarks and presentation. You're in a particularly difficult situation, and I think you've approached it with a lot of professionalism and candor, which is welcome. Will we be hearing from the school committee this evening? Are there prepared remarks? It strikes me as odd that it's a subcommittee group. I don't know if that's been the case in prior years, or I know other school committee members are here this evening. I don't know, was there a rationale behind not the full school committee here? Was there any decision to have it be a subcommittee meeting? We're talking a lot about the budget. The reason I ask is because it's the school committee's budget, and they're the ones who will be acting on it. So I think perhaps of all of us, they're the most important ones to hear from. So.
Well, so it was not a deliberate decision to have just a subcommittee tonight, so that's the first thing. So that was a...
it was not a deliberate decision?
No, it was a mistake in the posting of the meeting. So our process has been is to hear from the district side what the recommended budget would be, and then to work it in the subcommittee, the Capital Financial Subcommittee, and then take a final budget recommendation to the full committee for their ratification.
So, thank you, Jean. So thus far, you've had the vote in the beginning of the month to adopt the budget originally.
Tentative budget, yes.
Tentative budget, right. But that's what I meant by originally, thank
Right.
you. And I didn't mean to call you, I had no idea.
As a procedural matter,
Yeah. I'm aware of how the Section 10 works and all that.
right,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
of the regional agreement, there's a certain deadline
Yeah.
to be met.
Yeah,
So in order to hit that, in order to not violate the regional agreement, a certain date had to be met. So we made clear that at the time, it was a tentative budget, knowing that it was going to be not the final budget. So.
For sure, and so we're aware of how that works. And to my earlier comment, I didn't mean to call you out if there was a scheduling snafu. We've had our share,
Yeah.
so,
It
not
was
trying to
inadvertent.
be
I
gotcha
apologize
there. I just think it's
to the other, my other
notable that we
colleagues.
have lots of school committee members over there and lots of empty seats and.
Yeah, we'd violate open meeting law if we had them say something,
Say no
so
more, say no more.
I don't want to do that.
So back to the process. So I understand that happens the beginning of the month, the tentative vote. and then there were 2 recorded budget workshops that have happened since.
Yes.
And then I think you had a non-televised, because I couldn't see, but I think you had another workshop, subcommittee group, maybe.
You've had many,
Or
more than one.
Several meetings.
Yep.
So I guess the question is, just to put it out there, have there been any dollar changes between what we're looking at here in the tentative proposed recommended budget from what was originally voted on tentatively to what we have now? Like $1?
Yes.
Okay.
There
And
are,
have I missed those? Have those been spelled out?
well, we did not present them tonight because A, the school committee hasn't taken action on that, and B, we have tomorrow a leadership team meeting where we're going back with the ranges that the subcommittee gave us at our last meeting, and I think that would blow the whole process out the window if we were then publicly talking about reductions before they were able to weigh in.
Understood. Thank you.
Sorry to jump in.
No, it's quite all right.
No, that's helpful to understand the process. Honestly, if that was stated up front, throughout, I'm just kind of wondering, where are we in this, a month having gone by with the school committee really digging into it. And I'm curious how you would characterize, like, the school committee's, I guess, attitude towards it, like if there's recognition of the kind of grave situation this places the towns and frankly the schools in. Because as our colleagues have stated, I mean, this is really untenable. I mean, you can call it impossible, but it really threatens, I think, the fiscal viability of the institution that we rely on so heavily within our community. Couple of quick points, and then I'll
Can I respond to that? Can I
Yeah, of
respond to
course,
that
of course.
first? So I think, we're also residents of the town, so we're all very keenly aware of the burden that it places, right? So, but we're also elected officials for the school district, right? So we have to be mindful of what we've been elected to do and who we serve as elected official. We're not elected officials of the select boards. So we are advocating for the needs of the school district and our staff and our students and the needs. And we hear from a lot of parents saying that we want to be a high-functioning, very effective, like excellent system. Like we hear that a lot. In the survey responses for the superintendent search, you can see it all over the place where we want to be top 10, we want to be top 5, we want to be like Weston, we want to be like other districts, okay? So it's very clear that, there's a lot of residents who move into the 2 towns and they say that, they move in because of the schools. I myself moved from Somerville 7-8 years ago for the district, for the school system. And I'm not the only one in my neighborhood, right? So there's a competing interest here because in order to do that, we've seen the condition of the schools, right? They're not great. Just physical conditions of the schools are not great. We know that special education needs are skyrocketing, and we're very cognizant of that, right? But it's also a required service that we have to provide by law. The way to reduce those costs year over year in special ed services is to be able to make some investments so we can bring those services back into the district. And that does take an investment. Unfortunately, it does take an investment to do that. But again, the long run is to be able to provide those services, reduce the out-of-district tuition or transportation, reduce the out-of-district tuitions so that we have those needs and we have those services in the district to be able to do that. So you have a lot of competing interests of just being able to reduce the tax rate, but also having a high-functioning, very effective school. I would say, again, we all need to think about all opportunities here, including at the town side, about revenue sources for other services, just town side services, That's a need that you all see too. And those town side services are also growing and also increasing. We've had good conversations with the Hamilton Capital Committee. We haven't gotten to the capital side yet, but I know there's a growing list on the capital side, at least in Hamilton. There's a growing list for the school side. So we're all in the same boat. So I just fear that we're getting to this contentious element of that the schools are the problem because they're driving
I said nothing of the sort or anything to the contrary of the statements you made.
No, you did not say that.
The record.
But I perceive that. Right.
Well, I think that, Gene, we just want to make sure that there's a recognition that this is an alarmingly high
We recognize
budget.
that.
And without the towns, there are no schools and vice versa. So I don't view it as competing for the dollars as a statement. I view it as a collaborative approach and making sure that this is an outstanding, long-term viable educational institution. And frankly, with this level of increase, it won't be for long. It can't be. And we respect the autonomy of the school committee, without a doubt. As was stated by Joe earlier, that's your job. You were voted to make sure that you have the right administration in place to oversee the professional education of the students. And we all rely on you to do that, myself included. We were all, many of us are parents of students in the school district. But that said, these numbers need to be addressed with severity and with rigorous debate and deliberation. I think, having watched the first evening of your workshop, Julie requested many times for guidance and direction from the school committee. Tell us where to go with this is effectively what she's asking. And I'm asking you where you've guided her to go. So if you could give us an indication of the specific areas that you've requested, and I understand maybe more is to come tomorrow and we can't kind of get ahead of the game, but thus far we haven't seen anything different from what was a month ago.
I'll just pause there, because I know that other people want to,
Sure.
honor the initial goals and not
Thank you.
monopolize the mic.
Could I just real quick, just a small redirect? You said, you seemed to indicate that you thought that one of the goals of the town was to try to decrease the tax rate. I don't think anybody here has suggested that tonight. We recognize that the tax rate is going to go up. And yes, you're right, the town side costs are going up too. I would say that they're much more in line with inflation and actually behind inflation. So the fact that we're able to keep our growth below the average inflation and within the 2.5, I think shows the fiscal responsibility we take seriously. Budgets grow. They all grow across the board everywhere. So nobody's asking to cut the tax rate. Nobody has. And this isn't Julie or Vinnie's fault. I get it. We're not, again, pointing at people, but a budget was approved last year. And 2 weeks into the fiscal year, the people that put that budget together were predicting a $600,000 shortfall. Not trying to be mean here, but that's not being fiscally responsible. So now you're asking us to make another big increase to cover that mistake. When does it end? We all want the schools to be well. We all want the schools to be the jewel of the community. We're all working towards that. But we still also have to provide police protection and fire protection. We have to clean our streets. We have to provide water. I'm required by law to provide Board of Health services. It's not like anything we have on the town side is a luxury. And we just want to be sure that we're working openly about this. And again, I recognize the difficulty here. We ask you not to talk about the bottom line budget. But the truth is, 60% of your budget is tied up in salaries. So if we ask you to cut from 13 to 5 in a growth, and I'm not asking you to cut the budget, I'm asking you to cut your growth. We recognize that that's going to mean things in programmatic-wise. That's, as Alex said, what you're supposed to do.
So the challenge that we have this year, and I appreciate how difficult it is to have this conversation, and I know everyone is trying to be respectful, but you also have to understand your reality, because lowering this % increase doesn't make those service needs go away. It pushes them into that level service budget, and something has to come out. And you just said it, 60% of the budget is people. And when you already have class sizes, 22, 24, there's not extra people floating around. And this is a tough budget. I fully understand that. And it is not sustainable, and I don't want you to be having this conversation next year and the year after and the year after. But at some point, we have to right the ship. This could be the year that we all take a deep breath and we right the ship, or we can make it somewhat painful this year, and then it'll be somewhat painful next year, and it'll be somewhat painful the next year after, and it'll keep going. Because if you're not building, you have two jobs when it comes to serving students. You have to either create the program, or you have to locate them in a program that is appropriate. And if we don't create the programs, it's always going to cost us 10 times more, if not higher, to locate the child in an appropriate program. And so I'm not expecting you to say yes to a budget like this every single year, but we have to right the ship. We have to. These needs aren't going to go away. They're not, the kids' needs aren't going to go away. And that doesn't mean that we're not committed to bringing this budget to a more reasonable % increase over what was approved in FY20. But if you're looking for some trust, I know I haven't been here long enough to earn your trust. This isn't the best way to get it. I get that, right? But look at what your budget increase would be if we had an appropriate budget in FY20. And that should give you a sense of what we're really asking for in FY21, while also trying to manage what we already know about the needs.
If I may.
Sure.
I'm concerned about the use of certain labels that may not be entirely probative of the underlying.
Sorry, David, can you speak into the mic, please, so people can hear you?
Thank you. I'm concerned about the use of certain terminology that I think is designed to give us some comfort level, but may in fact be suggestive of endemic, repetitive situation, as Alex suggests, compromising ultimately the viability of the school system. For example, contractual obligations suggests that there is some law that requires X amount of money. And I understand that you and Vinnie are not accountable for agreements reached thus far in terms of contracts. The school committee is. But in the formation of these contractual obligations, there is discretion. I'm not aware that there was any arbitration decision or other mandate from a neutral that required the increases provided. That's discretionary. A couple of years ago, you remember, you may not be aware of this, but there was a kerfuffle about additional money sought for critical goals. And I think that was the correct word used in the advocacy. And I understood some of that dealing with special education enhancement. So when we meet amongst ourselves and discuss this, we say, what did that investment purchase? You indicate there's a theory, you have to invest.
Yeah.
So what was it 400,000 or whatever that excess was? What did it achieve?
So I actually am aware of that investment, if you would want me to speak
It's
to
a
it.
special education.
Yes.
So in FY19, you all as a community invested in 3.5 additional full-time equivalents for special educators. And at the time, I'm not going to remember the exact dollar amount, but a dollar amount was projected as cost savings because we would be able to retain students in district. That has been the case. That is true. And I know I sent this out to everyone back in October, was it? When Stacy did her budget, our Director of Student Service did a presentation, and I believe it was slide 12, if you want to go back and look at that presentation. And she showed evidence that we are currently outpacing the projected cost savings because of that investment.
So the totals that you and Nick Tenson discussed a few minutes ago, they're significant
They are.
amounts of money,
Yeah,
which suggests that more needs to be done
absolutely.
to mitigate that exposure.
Absolutely. This budget does some of that.
So, for example, I understand the law allows a school committee, school district, school administration to challenge parental requests. And I'm told, I don't know this personally, but in the past, that may not have been as aggressively pursued by the district. Can you tell us what plans there may be afoot to exercise those legal prerogatives?
Sure. So a couple of things to that end. One, Vinny and I went to visit some of these out-of-district placements ourselves to see our students in the placement, to understand what is it that this program is offering that is attracting parents to either unilaterally place their child there or for us to recommend that the child be placed there. And what would it take for us to offer a comparable program here in our district? And so we've already started to do that. And you have to think, for every one placement, it can be anywhere from $55,000 plus transportation to $147,000 plus transportation. If we have a student who requires a residential placement, it can cost upwards of $200,000. We don't get to choose on that piece of it, right? But we can serve our students better from day one and design programs that will keep them in district and meet their needs here. And one example of that, in addition to the 3.5 FTEs that I just spoke about at the high school level, one other example would be our language-based program that we've developed at the elementary schools. So we're seeing more and more students with specific learning disabilities that require specialized language instruction. So a couple of things we've been doing is trying to train all of our staff so they have the tools, because these instructional strategies are good for all learners. For students who have specific learning disabilities, it's like oxygen. You could think of it like that, right? So we've made some investments in our people and trying to get them new knowledge and skills so they can respond. We also have added specialized programming, which has allowed us to retain, we have 17 students currently in our elementary language-based program. If we didn't have that program, they would have to go somewhere else to get that education. So that's a good investment for us. We have.
Thank you. The point I inadequately phrased, I guess, was the law allows you to challenge
Yep.
parental requests for special, out-of-district special education opportunity. And I indicated it was my hearsay understanding that the district had not in the past pursued its legal entitlement. So my question essentially is, do you have any plans to be more assertive in terms of your legal rights?
So one of the things that's currently in this tentative budget is an increase in our special ed legal line. So if you looked, going back to FY17, it's been budgeted flat funded, $40,000 each year, even though the last 2 years we've overspent that line almost by 100%. And so we've increased that line, A, to match the current need, but also so that we can be more fiscally prepared to fight when we know we have a defensible program in district. My point in talking about the programming is it only makes sense to litigate those cases when we know we have a defensible program. Otherwise, you're kind of just opening the window and turning up the heat. So it has to be hand in hand. You have to do the two things together.
Or it could be that the parental desire to enhance their children's education overstates a need. You're entitled to evaluate a parental claim or a need for special education.
We do.
Correct?
Yes.
And you're telling us you do that.
We do that, yes.
And is there some data or other documentation that will help us understand the success of those efforts?
Sure. I can work with legal counsel to see what's appropriate to share in a public way. Of course, not identifying specific
Appreciate
students.
knowing that. Another phrase you use is, this is a corrective year. And I'm concerned about that because in implementing the corrections, they become part of the base. So that in fiscal '22, if it's a more moderate percentage, less than 12.8 or even the mid-range, it's on top of the base inflated, pardon, I don't mean to be contentious, but enlarged by either the 12.8 or the 9 to 10. So how can, we can't isolate fiscal '21. I understand you gave us some hopeful signs that fiscal '22 may be more moderate, but it's, whatever it is, it's on top of this enlarged base. And that goes to Alex's point again. This is becoming like Topsy, a growing burden here. We haven't talked about OPEB. The OPEB obligation is approximately 30 million, give or take. That's not funded in this budget. You're proceeding essentially on a pay-as-you-go basis to meet those obligations. But the liability is there. You mentioned, or Vinnie did, structural infrastructure issues. No one's contesting the conditions as you have determined them to be in terms of not ideal. That's more money, correct? On top of everything. How do we come to grips with all this? We, as Joe indicated, we have an obligation to supply town services which benefit families and students in the school district. Hamilton is projecting a 2% or so increase, measured against 12.8 or 9.10 in the middle range. You understand just the impact of that. It's troublesome, and troublesome is not the adequate expression. What do we do about this, folks? How do we manage this important resource, the education system? Or maybe we can't. Maybe we can't afford it. I don't intend that to be rhetorical necessarily. I'd be interested in that kind of Armageddon approach to educational life here.
So, David, let me ask you then, what would you suggest to be done?
I'm suggesting, Gene, that we may have to find some alternative to taxpayer funding of this kind of increasingly confiscatory burden. Our population in Hamilton is increasingly getting within the senior category.
Sure.
I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's sizable and increasing. There's bound to be pushback. I'm not trying to demean the value of education. Please understand that. I'm trying to, I think, along with Alex and Joe and others, to say to you, this is just not sustainable. So the school committee can, for example, in bargaining with its employees, the 60% or more personnel cost attribution of personnel, take a hard line, see where that takes you. I don't know how you approached bargaining, but you've granted increases beyond the town side result in bargaining. That suggests to us some improvident approach. It suggests that to our employees also. I absolutely compliment, as Alex did, your preparation and your presentation. And ultimately, the voters will decide, especially where there are overrides. We have to make recommendations to the voters. That's our obligation. And it may be that we need to take some kind of drastic step to begin to curtail this.
So I just want to make sure that, the consequence of reducing the budget significantly is basically elimination of programs.
I understand, Gene, and as Joe said, we talk about bottom lines and leave to you the expenditure, where you place those dollars. And you're saying, well, the town's bottom line leaves you with no choice but to do X, Y, and Z. And we're asking you to take another look to see if there are other choices. None of it's desirable, I appreciate that. But how do you react to our thought that if it's not this year, it's next year, or fiscal '23, but with OPEB staring us at 30 million between the two town liability, that's taxpayer liability, and the infrastructure and the need for school structural enhancement or replacement, and the athletic fields, and all of this, it's just, folks, it's just not sustainable, and that's foreseeable.
Can I ask a question? So I'm perplexed by something. I don't have a spreadsheet to prove this. But it seems to me that a 12.8% increase in a school budget is unusually high. And if we compared this increase to districts, I don't know, pick a cohort, that this number, this increase is significantly higher than most. I understand what you've said about coming in with a deficit, although it sounds like a lot of this year's deficit, you've closed the gap. I understand that. What I don't understand is, and I understand all the increases, which seem sort of reasonable, but what is it that's actually driving what would maybe typical growth rate of 5% for a school district year over year, even a very good school district? What drives it to be probably more than twice what we might typically expect for a good school district?
The first thing is the deficit. So even though we're working to curtail this year, which is conserve spending, and we're going to hopefully be able to cover the deficit with the circuit breaker reserves, that is not sustainable. We can't keep saying to our staff, do your job at a higher level, and we want to be, here in the state, and we're not going to give you any resources to do that, or we're not going to give you the training that you need to be prepared to serve the students that are before you. That is not sustainable. That's not healthy for the organization. It's not healthy for the community. So no, I do not know of another school budget in the state that has a % increase like this. The challenge that we have is that we have very little revenue. We have just like the same challenges the towns have, right? We don't have a big commercial base that's generating a ton of revenue. It's falling solely on the taxpayers' backs. Pretty much. I mean, we're receiving about $4 million from the state each year, 4.6, I think, next year, if I'm remembering correctly. But here's your drivers. This is what's driving this budget. So this is just looking at the $4 million gross increase. This is not counting the revenue side of things. And you can see what the drivers are. Yes, it's contractual obligations. I would like to be able to, trust me when I tell you, go back 3 years and make a lot of different decisions about things in the school system. And we do that sort of analysis and autopsy, if you will, but that doesn't change the current reality, right? And so we have to respond to the current reality. And we know that this is not sustainable, but if we don't properly, adequately fund the budget, at some point, you just keep kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, I guess that I'm still not understanding, though, because we've never, I shouldn't say never, in my experience, 20 years or so, we have not had to make a correction this great. And we certainly have had some challenges over the years. And so what I guess I'm trying to understand is the revenue situation is exactly as you say, for all of us. Mm-hmm. It's all on us. Yep. It's all on the residents. There's no business. But that's not new. So what specifically this year, given sort of a revenue that we know, given a contract that's, a little high, but, we've seen these numbers before in the years, what specifically about this year? And I think my guess there's something to do with special education. I've never, ever seen a number of out-of-district placements that high. And you started to talk about that, but what is it specifically this year that's getting us to a 12-point-something% increase?
It's the deficit plus the known unknowns of student needs. We could choose to not fund them like we did in FY20, and then when they happen, we have nowhere to go to get those funds. And so we have known knowns. So these are students whose needs we already have identified and whose programs that are already placed in, and there's a cost to that, right? And then we have known unknowns, which are students who we're currently either evaluating or we're currently working with the families, and we don't yet know what the outcome will be, but we know kind of worst case scenario, if you will. And then over here, there's unknowns, right? These are kids who haven't yet come to the district. That happens every year too. We haven't even accounted $1 in this budget for the unknowns. We're only talking about the students that we see today, that we know about today, and what it would cost to meet their needs based on what we know today. And that's projection, right? A budget is different than an audit because we're projecting and we're trying to say, how do we make sure that we are prepared for the known unknown? And even with that, we've refined that number from our preliminary budget reading back in December when we first presented to the school committee. That number has become refined.
So if I could say, so I think I want to answer your question, Catherine. So part of it is anticipatory, right? If Julie and her team are already evaluating some students and are observing the students and what their needs are, right?
Yeah.
We don't have a program currently in the district that can meet those needs. We're still obligated to meet those needs. That then triggers potentially out-of-placement tuition and transportation, right?
So do we budget for, so is that what you're saying there?
Yes, anticipatory, yes.
To the tune of how much of that 4.9 million?
We're budgeting for $412,127, I believe, for additional out-of-district tuitions.
412,000? And those are the unknowns that you're referring to?
They're the known unknowns, is what I would say. They're current students who we currently have, but we don't know what the legal, either the legal outcome will be, because we are trying to fight some of these cases and prove that we can meet the students' needs. So there could be some of that in that number, and or we know that they've already been, parents are looking to place them out, and we're trying to keep them in or meet their needs here.
Gotcha. Sorry, Gina, I cut you off. I just wanted to get clarification.
So obviously, the way to slow the growth year over year is to try to address the special education needs, right? That does require us to have programming in the district. Because otherwise, again, if we're obligated to meet those needs, we don't have those needs in the district. Going back to the first statement, we're still obligated to meet those needs, then that means that the district is paying for the tuition and the transportation, right? And that clearly outpaces any normal growth that you would see, right? Supplies year over year don't really grow. Capital is a different thing, right? If we negotiate a contract that's more favorable to the district and the towns, right? But there's no assumption that special education needs would not be limited to 2.5% growth year over year. You just can't anticipate that, right? So again, what Julie is saying is we're budgeting in anticipatory costs of current students that she's observing, or, sorry, kids already in another situation, right? Kids that she's observing now in the district that could potentially go out if we don't have those services. And then obviously, we have kids coming in who we don't see, right? Families move in. There's, you don't know because you're observing, 1,500 kids. So that's, again, so the way to drive the year-over-year growth down is to try to address the special education needs. And part of this budget does do that, right? Again, the kindergarten TAs, the speech language pathologist, the licensed social worker, like all those are attempts to try to drive this year-over-year growth down. It won't appear, obviously, next year, right? Whatever budget is finally passed and whatever the voters agree to, but you will see those. You should see those savings if we see, if we anticipate, if the theory works out, right? You will see those savings over time.
Gene?
Could I ask a question about the 766 law? Regarding 766, which is probably, I can't remember when that was established, in 81 or 82, I believe. Is there any stipulation in the law that prevents a community from entering into defined or formulated cost-sharing agreements with families or institutions in your community? Is there any language in that law that we know of that would, or is the law silent on that, or is there any opportunities for cost-sharing?
So we have a variety of cost-sharing agreements, some with individual families, where we'll pay a portion of, say, a private or a public-private placement. We also are a part of the North Shore Education Collaborative, which allows us to have cost savings for certain services that students might need, 45-day placements or out-of-district placements or other specialized programming. We're in the process of trying to join the SEAM Collaborative also, because they, for a very nominal membership fee, we're able to have steep tuition discounts. This wasn't something that the district explored in the recent past, and so I'm working with that board, which is a rigorous process. I will have to be interviewed. Their hesitation right now with the SEAM Collaborative is, well, are you going to stay in Hamilton Wenham or not? Like, what's the plan moving forward? Because it's an all-superintendent board, and part of that is the service. I go to monthly meetings with the North Shore Education Collaborative, and we make decisions and we vote on their budget, and we serve as like their school committee. And so that's another thing that we're doing right now. So there's a multi-pronged approach to trying to change this reality in our community. I will be honest with you and tell you that it's going to take 3 to 5 years with a very concerted, intentional effort, as long as we're committed to building those programs back in our district. And Catherine, you were on the school committee before, so I'm sure you remember, we used to have all of these programs in our district. And over time, we started eliminating a lot of these programs, probably as a cost-saving measure in that one fiscal year. But it takes one student, for the most part, to create, if you create a program for one student, it will serve the community well and the student well for life. You don't need like a ton of kids to create a program.
I will agree with you on that. And yes, I was on the school committee, and yes, we did have a fairly aggressive approach to trying to keep kids in district with having our own programs. Some of those did go away, and some of them are now back. But I am not sure that programming alone, even over 5 years, is going to reduce 70 out-of-district placements in our district of less than 2,000 students. Am I right about that number? That we're ever going to do that with just programming, even in 5 years. And in my experience, anyway, we've never had that percentage of not only special ed students, but out-of-district. So I guess and I won't belabor this anymore, I'd love to talk offline. Yeah. I'm just trying to understand what is different, because it is a very unusual and unique situation, and something has shifted, and it's not clear to me what it is, and it's unique to this district, because...
Well, so it's happening across the state. It's happening across the country. The students' needs have shifted, and we're better at identifying them, and we're better at serving kids than we've ever been before. So that's a national trend. Again, I will say it's disproportionately high here in Hamilton Wenham, and there's multiple factors. Programming is actually the #1 thing that we can do. High quality, defensible programs is the #1 thing we can do. Keep our kids here in their home districts, meeting their needs right here in their home districts, so that parents aren't looking at other places, and so that if they do, one of the other great things about living on the North Shore is that you have lots of choices. There's a lot of really specialized programs right here in a very short commute. So we're competing in a lot of ways against those really high quality specialized programs. I believe deeply that we can develop the same quality, if not better quality programs here in our local district. And so I do think programming is the answer. And I think it's communication. We need to market our programs better. We have some outstanding programs. I don't know that everyone in our community knows about our programs. So we're looking at program descriptions. We're looking at enhancing our website so it's more accessible and so people can see what our programs are. As just another layer of, like I said, it's a multi-pronged approach. But I know that it's worth our time and effort because it's going to pay off. And we just have to manage the reality while also, that preventative side of things.
I understand, thank you.
I want to pick up on a couple of things. Jean, you mentioned that there was an adversarial type of feeling, and yes, there will be an adversarial type of feeling because of there's a tension between money and what needs to be done. But I came to this town with no children and wanted to come to this town, and I want this town to have a great education. That's something that I'm keen on, and I think it's something that most people in this town are keen on. And the reason I brought up asked that question right off the bat of what the cost for the out-of-placement, because I think that's where I've watched over the last 5 years, the budget has been exploding in that area over the last 5 years. And the transportation, so you're talking about $5.6 million in total cost here. And one of the things that we had encouraged was that in 19 was to have those extra people. And we'd really like to see an ROI. What has that bought us? And to find out. That aside, you're going to do that. I think that's something that you can do and look at. Yeah. But then where else can we go? I think the cost-sharing idea is a great idea. I didn't know that it was done, and I think that's a good positive thing. But have we looked at a state, we as a town, our towns, have no commercial base. So we're at a real disadvantage of trying to support a lot of what's going on in this kind of growth that you're talking about. And it's going across the state. It's going to be affecting a lot of different towns. Maybe we have, right now, have a lot of educated people who are saying, oh, I can get this for my child, or I can get that for my child, because they know more. But it's going to happen in rural towns that don't have industries. Should we be looking at a state-supported programs where we reach out to the state for towns that don't have the commercial support, that can somehow use it's state mandated, the state should be helping us support that. The other thing is, and it was part of that investment in 19, is that we developed the programs, and I'm very supportive of developing programs superior to what other people do, so we bring people in. If we can bring it in, then you have some revenue.
Absolutely.
And that's another place that we have an opportunity if we can create those kind of programs. And I think that's going to be strategic on the school board as to where are the places that are a high value for us that we can draw not just correct internally, but from externally. So those are the kinds of things that I think we become a program leader,
yeah.
And that's what I'm thinking about. So I'd like to see those things happen. I'd just like to do it cost effectively. I don't want to blow up the budget unless we have a plan that shows how we're going to make those things happen, get an ROI.
And I'll just, before we kind of move on to the next part of the conversation, we are doing that. And we're looking currently at the high school. So part of that FY19 investment was to develop a functional life skills program at our high school. And so we've been able to keep some students in district for that. And now we're saying, okay, what else do we need to really make this an attractive, defensible program? And so we're trying to do some facility upgrades within our operating budget in order to be able to, add some adaptive daily living aspects. Like, so it's like learning how to do laundry and how to sort and fold. It's learning how to make your bed. It's about personal hygiene, like that level of basic adaptive living stuff that we just don't have the facilities right now. We used to have this. This actually existed in our high school, and we dismantled it at some point. And when you look at, the idea of developing a high-quality program as a revenue generator, first thing first, let's meet our kids' needs. And then as we build that program, we can actually do that. And this district did that before. I think it was like FY13 or 14, 15, you can see where we were actually bringing kids in and generating revenue because we had those types of programs.
And as I
But we have to rebuild.
As
Like
I
we're-
understood it, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
you were going to provide some figures to demonstrate what the fiscal 19 investment.
Yeah, I know I shared it earlier, but I will send it right at the end of this meeting.
appreciate
I believe
that.
it's
Thank you.
slide 12 of that presentation, but, yeah,
I have some
absolutely.
specific questions, just went through them. The school resource officer, if I go to some of the slides, I'm on the third one, where you have the level and the not equal sign between it, so the second one after that. It's budgeted for $57,000.
Yes.
Is that shared now between the two towns? And I thought it was like 73,000 last year.
District cost, the full salary, so it's divided by 180 days.
Okay.
So we cover of the 260.
So is that split between the two towns now?
The 57 would be split through the assessment.
Okay, so-
57 is for for the school year?
Yeah.
When that person's not on the school year, cost would be absorbed by Hamilton.
By Hamilton, okay. The second question was on the kind of random, is on the, on this sheet right here. The number of staff reductions, does that include the retirees who are leaving, or is that on top of?
On top of.
On top of, okay. Then the last question I have is the athletic fees. Last year, I believe it was last year, it was included in the budget, in your budget. Have you looked at kind of putting those back into place?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you say yes?
Yes.
Can I, only if you're
No, I'm done, thanks.
I just want to do a time check, right, because it's past 9. We haven't gotten through this capital. I don't know what the appetite is to continue, how we want to do that. This is a shared meeting, right, so we're just hosting, the school is just hosting, so I just want to make sure that we're all.
I appreciate the time check, but I think we're all here that really talk, so I'm okay with pushing it a little farther if everybody else is.
And I just have a quick, if I may. So Julie, and actually Vinny, you can probably keep me honest on this. I wanted to go a click deeper on Catherine's question earlier as to if we kind of do a very high-level attribution of some of the reasons, some of the key drivers, you had the pie chart up there before, for this year's increase to 12.5%, what are they? And I think, Julie, you made clear that special ed in particular is to be attributed for a lot of the increase. So I just did a couple quick high-level numbers here. Rounding to nearest 50, 100,000. Then you keep me honest. So I started with the increase, which is 4.36 million year over year. And if that corresponds with 12.5%, I just cut that in half, thinking, okay, maybe we're at 6-ish, 6 plus, tick above 6%, which would correspond, I think, with something more, still perhaps deemed to be a little high for a level services budget, but more in the order of what we had. Quick historical context: 17 to 18 was a 4.3% budget increase. 18 to 19 was 5.4%. 19 to 20, 6.6. That also included the 600,000 of debt being folded into the operating. So could be a little higher, I suppose, depending on how you do the math. And of course, 12.5 this year. So it ticked up about 1 percentage point per year, a little over, until doubling. So if we cut it in half, we're now down to 2.18 million increase, dollar terms, total operating budget. If we take out the known unknowns of 412,000 from 2.18, that brings us pretty cleanly to 1.6. So my question is a deficit, it started at 600 and you got it to 200, am I way off on that? Is that about right? It's about right. Rough ballpark?
It gets to 233 when you count for the curtailment. So, and we're only halfway through the school year. So that is right now saying that we're able to conserve all of those dollars that the leadership team put into a curtailment account.
Which may not come to fruition, but optimistically, let's call it from 6 to 400, even though you did better than that. Let's leave some wiggle room. So we knock off 400 of the 1.6, so we're now down in that 1.2 range of sort of, I don't want to suggest unexplained or mystery money, but maybe in thinking about and framing this as like a normal budget increase year without the corrective actions as you've described, above and beyond those which are significant, and again, largely attributable, the increase to those. Kind of where, and I guess maybe that's where we're at here with this pie chart. Kind of roughly equal size, excluding any out-of-district and transportation similar slices. But I would make the case and invite others to challenge it, because I just came up with it, and it could be ill-formed, that it is a little over $1 million higher than what it might be in an average year for reasons that haven't been articulated here amongst the group, given that we want to focus on the big dollar ticket items and not no offense, I mean, I know the risers need to be fixed, but yes, let's fix them for a few $1,000 bucks. So I just throw that out there.
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally followed that whole narrative, but are you suggesting that you think there's $1 million of like surplus in this budget?
I certainly wouldn't use, I'm not calling it like fat or surplus. I guess what I'm saying is, to Catherine, I think Catherine raised a good point where she said, we get the corrective aspect, but it's been increasing up, meaningfully up until the FY21. So she posed the question, what do we attribute this large increase to? Spelled out some of those reasons, and I guess what I'm suggesting is they don't account for, all of it.
Would you have a special tuition for that?
So I removed 412,000, which I believe you said you budgeted. 970.
You're forgetting.
400 from reality of 20, which is unbudgeted.
Okay.
Approximately another 5.
Okay, so that brings us down to 700,000 from a little over $1 million, basically. And again, I'm doing rough numbers here. Vinny, you know this budget better than anyone, so I'm not challenging the specifics. I'm just trying to get at the big picture, and maybe it can go no further with this basic analysis. So thank you for
Sure.
adding that in. Special ed 970, you said, right?
Correct.
Then I guess my other question, Alex, is, and maybe this slide is helpful in thinking about this, are you also counting all of these unbudgeted FY20 costs? So just to speed it up there, the 2.3% that was not budgeted in FY20. So yes, you did approve a 5.6% increase from 19 to 20, but then the next day, we needed 2.3% more than that.
Which the deficit stemmed from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Much part. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I was doing. I was taking out the 600 to bring down that kind of
Yeah, it was hard to follow.
differences, yeah. I'm just trying to tell the story. We all have a difficult story to tell, and the numbers tell the story. So, anyway, thank you.
The other area of the budget where you see a large increase in the tentative budget, which wasn't mentioned yet, is in our facilities and maintenance operations portion. So that actually has a significant increase this year. We're looking at refining that, and that section of the budget, if you're really interested in getting into the weeds, I'm happy to sit and talk with anyone about every single line in the budget. But if you look at spending, what was budgeted to what actually was spent year over year, you'll see that we've been under budgeting and spending over every year. And so there's a lot of correction in that way in this budget as well. And the other, just because we talked about it, like the special ed legal line, that's another example where we've been under budgeting it, but the need still happens and we end up funding it. So I don't know if that would help explain some of the other areas.
That raises a question, a point for me, that as someone who is not used to doing sort of financial budgeting like that, to me, the fact that more was spent is overspending, not under budgeting. So we're talking about this as a correction because it was under budgeted in the past, but that was overspending. And so that whole line of reasoning of, well, in the past, the budget was this, and it should have been this, and so the increase is only, X minus Y, it's not flying. The increase is the increase. And I'm coming at this from the point of view of not just a FinCom member, but also a resident who has kids in the school district, and also, when I looked at moving here, the school district was something that was a bonus, a benefit that I was looking for. Mm-hmm. But at this point, I don't think we can maintain existing programs.
The what programs?
Existing programs. I mean, everyone has said we want a good school budget, we want the best for the kids. It seems to me that just looking at the budget, what it's going to be this year, what the taxes impact is going to be this year, there's going to be, seems to me, no matter what, there's going to be an override required again next year, because we're not going to be able to keep the growth under 2.5%, and we're up against that line. So I think we're at the point, school committee, where programs need to be cut. And I don't know where to do that, but that's the reality. It's either that or town services are going to be cut. So, no trash pickup. We're going to be having to explain to residents that something's got to be cut. And it might be the schools, or it might be paving the roads. Thank you.
I just want to quickly summarize from my perspective our comments. We're intended to be positive. We're not necessarily directed toward Lily or Vinnie. They were directed to the school committee. And that's where I'll stop.
Would we like to?
Let's keep going. Let's just keep on.
I'm just going to say, David, thank you. Point well taken. And we have been working, and we will continue to work and maintain or try to be at a budget that is attainable and keeps our schools and everybody in their home without having it be a huge financial burden.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, moving on. More good news. No, you know, when we talk about capital, I didn't prepare something. I just brought my spreadsheet to give myself some notes. I think the school committee's aware that the town of Hamilton this year implemented a capital committee. Previously, the capital planning process had been kind of generated out of the town manager and board of selectmen's office with the help of department heads. We took a more community-wide approach in terms of developing those needs, or developing those list of needs, trying to assign them a kind of a priority and a time frame. And then we asked residents in the town to serve on a volunteer committee and help us reprioritize into a way that made sense for them as taxpayers. The 5-year capital plan that we came up with totaled $39.2 million in investments over the next 5 years that are needs. For the first year, FY21, they were seeking $2.5 million. I think that's right. Is that right? Yeah. And they were prioritized by the capital committee so that we could start to make some decisions about, okay, we know we can't do $2.5 million in capital programs this year, so where do we have to make our investments? And we've got that right now for this year, about $500,000. We're putting $2 million off, I think, in order to try to balance it based on what we're seeing from your budget needs, and us trying to be responsible to make sure we can maximize our effort to help. So,
can you give us a sense of what makes up that 500? If you're able to say publicly.
Yeah, I am. There's, I should have brought that with me, right? Marissa, the best finance director in here. Sorry, guys. Right now, we're proposing a fuel system for the DPW yard, a public safety building boiler, a police cruiser, a required stormwater upgrade for the DPW. That's the MS4 permits, state mandated, federally mandated, I think. So we don't have a choice. We have to make those upgrades. $50,000 at Patton Park, for drainage. And that will actually help the schools too, because you guys play baseball there, and we're trying to get the water off that field for you, so that helps. And then we have to, the repeaters at the Emergency Communications Center have outlived their useful life, and they have to be upgraded or improved, enhanced, replaced, whatever you want to call it, so that we can continue to provide emergency communication services to our public safety people. So that's, everything else is now going to be recalibrated for the next 5 years, starting in FY22. And, that's good budgeting. I think one of the things that might have been lost in some of our tough discussion here is that when Julie talks about the curtailment, or Vinnie talks about the efforts that they made this year to try to close that $600,000 deficit, that's good news. That's great. You've got two really good people here doing what they're supposed to do. When you get a budget, you're supposed to live within it. So they're doing their best to do that. And I appreciate them trying to forecast out and say, we can't keep doing this way. The budget process from our perspective as administrators has been positive. We met regularly, we've talked, we've shared our real world scenarios. But, so the capital is similar. We know we have needs coming, and we're gonna take care of what we have to this year. And, that doesn't include a potential ask for town hall renovation. That renovation was originally planned to go before town meeting at this town meeting. I think that we may be delaying that. But we still have a 100-year-old building that doesn't have fire suppression, it's not handicapped accessible, it doesn't have the right number of bathrooms for the people that work there every day. So we still have to address those needs at some point. But, it may not be at this annual town meeting. Just thought I'd leave it there. Went and brought a presentation though, so let Anthony dazzle us.
Thanks, Joe. First, I want to echo what Joe said. This is my third community I've been in, and I have to say, working together with Superintendent Vinnie and Joe has been the most transparent process that I've seen so far. So I thank them for sharing as much as they've shared. With that, I'll get into our capital outlook. So we asked our department heads to put together a 5-year capital improvement plan that has the following criteria. Projects that are greater than 10 years, they have a useful life of greater than 1 year. Again, it's a 5-year plan, and we asked them to rank their projects a priority. We have 5 funding categories for our capital improvement plan. The operating budget, the revolving fund, this is the water department. I'm sorry, it's the iron rail facility. Chapter 90 is the money that the state gives us to repair our roads and sidewalks. The water fund comes from the ratepayers, and then free cash. So of our 5 funding categories, 3 are coming from really being self-sustained within the fund. So again, the revolving fund, the $25,000, that's coming from iron rail rentals. Chapter 90, that's coming from the state. The $85,000 for water fund projects is coming from the water fund. The operating budget, $338, those are, and $971, those are reoccurring costs. So a lot of that is leases. There is a fire truck in there, there's a cruiser in there, there's a front-end loader in there. So some of that will go down in time as it retires. And then the last thing that we have this year is we're trying to see if possible we could have used some of our free cash, which is what free cash is really for, to fund capital. And there's $317,000 plus worth of projects that we're looking at. And the spreadsheet you all have, you can feel free to look at. But some of the difficult decisions that the Board of Selectmen and FinCom has to make this year is whether or not we have a second pumper in town, no fire truck. Whether or not we have a backup ambulance to support in case our ambulance went down. And we witnessed that this year when we had a unfortunate incident occurred with our ambulance. And we're relying upon that revenue, which is roughly about $150,000 a year. So if that goes down, that hurts this community. And the last thing, which I would think is very important, considering what we've all talked about tonight, is a master plan. because a master plan identifies how the community is going to move forward in the years to come with land use, transportation, housing, and most importantly, economic development. Because in order to be able to sustain what we have right now, even at 5%, the communities have to start looking at opportunities to increase the tax base. Those are the difficult decisions that these boards are going to have to be making. So, more to come. That's all I have. The next couple of slides is the PowerPoint, is the spreadsheets which you all have. If anybody has any questions, happy to answer them, and then just the decisions.
So we too have some slides. Sorry, Joe. I'm really just presenting some of the slides from our Director of Facility Maintenance and Operations budget that he presented to the school committee on December 18th. So you can go back and view that entire presentation in the video archive. But I have some highlights here for you. So what is a capital expense? This is defined for us in our regional agreement. So this is anything that costs exceeds $25,000 in one fiscal year, and we're looking at a sort of shelf life, if you will, for 5 years as opposed to 1 year, as Anthony described it. So I won't read that language to you, but one of the things our new Director of Facilities was charged with, he started in the district in September, so he's been with us just a short time, but he was charged with sort of reassessing the state of our capital needs and creating a 10-year capital improvement plan. And so not for you to necessarily read this here, but his original FY21 capital investment request was $1.8 million. Our capital financial planning subcommittee at the school committee said we understand those needs, we've seen those needs, because one of the things we did very early on when I arrived was do site visits of all of the schools so they could see the condition of our facilities. And at their direction, he then went back and refined and reprioritized the ask for FY21. And so I'll just highlight for you what this includes. So first and foremost, it's safety and infrastructure. So unfortunately, in today's day and age, our school employees and our students are faced with an added layer of stress and anxiety each and every day they come to school because of some of the things that's been happening in our society. Our schools do not have modern safety features that you see in pretty much any school that you go into. For example, we still have literal keys that we use to open the doors, and as opposed to having like a key fob entrance, which is much more secure because you can track who's coming in and who's coming out of the school. We have cameras mostly in the front of the schools so that if the visitor is standing in just the right location, the secretary can see who's coming into the school and can buzz them in. But we don't yet have a visitor management system or that electronic card access system, and we don't have interior security cameras or exterior security cameras near our other doors. They're just mostly at that front door. So that makes our schools very vulnerable. And this is a tough thing to talk about all of the details of the safety infrastructure improvements because some of that information you don't want necessarily to be public knowledge, but generally these are the three broad areas that we're looking at. In terms of our network infrastructure, we had several times this year where our phone systems actually did not work at the middle school and high school. Again, serious safety issue. We don't have cell service in most of our schools. If you pull into the high school, middle school parking lot, you can't even take a call on your cell if you wanted to. So our internal phone system needs to be working, and it is beyond the end of its useful life. There are major components that are failing and the parts are no longer available. And so we've done, our IT department has done an amazing job to try to keep it going as long as they can, but we are at the point where we need to invest. There's a lot of wonder about what's the future of the elementary schools. All of our elementary schools were built in the 50s. They don't have adequate space for current day programming, which poses some of our challenges. When we want to have more customized, individualized education, it requires different types of space use. A lot of people in town, in both towns, want to know what's the plan, what's the future. We really need to do a feasibility study so that we can present the community with plans. We do. It will be our third year submitting a statement of interest to the MSBA. That application round just opened up again on January 8th. One of the things we learned, Vinny, Tom Gary, our director of facilities, and I, after we found out we didn't get invited into the project pipeline this year, we called MSBA and we had a conference with them, a phone conference with them, to understand what could we do to make our application more desirable. So in the past, we only submitted a statement of interest for Winthrop and Cutler. We believe that including Bucher in the statement of interest will make our project more viable. And we also have learned that having an education plan and engaging the community in that process also makes our application much more viable. So we're looking to make that investment. We also just received our initial review from the NEASC accreditation process. We are gearing up for our 10th year. Every 10 years they come and they reassess the credibility of our programming at the high school. And one of the areas that we know we have to work on is the space at the high school. It's inadequately sized in many areas, and they're suggesting that improvements need to be done. So that will also be a part of this facility study and educational planning so that we can earn that accreditation. Classroom furniture. So we have antiquated classroom furniture in most of our classrooms. We have, if you went to school here, that's probably the same desk that you sat in. No matter how many years ago you went to school here, it's probably the same desk that you sat in. And so one of the things we know is that having more flexible seating options for students allows them to be more engaged, and we've been working with the Ed Fund to purchase some new modern furniture that's more flexible and allows us to maximize every corner of our schools in a better way. And what we'd like to do is standardize the furniture. So if you come into some of the classrooms or most of the classrooms, you'll notice that there's sort of like a hodgepodge of furniture, and it's not intentionally designed for that grade level or that program. So this money would allow us to standardize that, but then also do some of those program improvements I was talking about earlier and adding those adaptive daily life programs, enhancing them at the high school. Replacement of the sidewalks at the middle school. If you've been to the middle school recently, you know how unsafe this is. In 3 months, we've had 3 people be seriously injured, a staff member, a student, and a community member. This has been patched and puttied and packed cemented in a variety of different ways, but it's really just needs to be dug up. This is the entrance to our middle school, so anyone who comes to our schools for any activity that happens in our gyms, this is their first welcome to the district. Currently, if you were to go to the middle school, you'll see that it's all coned off, and we're trying to patch some of the deep crevices so that no one else gets hurt, but it's a massive liability to the district. And then, as was mentioned earlier, we have aging and unsafe athletic fields, and our track is also beyond its useful life. If you were just to walk the track, you would visibly be able to see that the coating that's on the top is wearing almost right down to the asphalt underneath, and in some areas there's even patches where you can see the asphalt underneath. And about 8 to 10 years ago, there was a committee of parent volunteers who got together, and they wanted to actually be able to fundraise to support this project. At the time, the Hamilton Community Preservation Committee funded a study through Gale. We looked at that study recently as this committee's been reinvigorated, and those folks are ready to get this project done and help fundraise for it. And what we noticed was that there's some Title IX issues in that plan. it enhances fields for, say, boys baseball, but it doesn't address the girls softball field. And we want to upgrade this study so that it's comprehensive and we make sure that we're being equitable and we aren't knowingly violating or creating any Title IX issues. So we need to really bring that study up to date so that we can then fundraise adequately and bring it to the voters in a timely way, so we aren't wasting district dollars by sending kids off campus to practice and compete. So overall, the ask for the proposed capital budget is $958,000, and I'll let Vinny talk to you about how that would be funded.
So this is our total debt service for FY21. We still have our cutler roof and summer projects from 2013. We have our Bucher boiler and window boiler glass project that I believe was completed in FY16. And we just wrapped up the sprinkler project over the past summer, so that is now in effect. And lastly, the new item on the list is the capital projects that we just referred to. We wouldn't go out for a ban for these expenses until well into FY21, so we don't anticipate any principal amount due. We are only anticipating a modest interest payment of $15,000. That would be the addition these projects would cost for next year.
Questions, comments?
When would you ban them?
Pardon?
When would you ban them?
Probably December
2020? What would the cost be at that point?
Well, you're going to make an interest-only payment this year, so in FY22, you'll start to pick up principal payments. What your principal payment would be?
Approximately $150,000.
Do you have debt service rolling off? Is like the Cutler roof, is that going to roll off and create some capacity under that?
The Cutler roof doesn't fall off until I believe FY23.
Okay.
So not next year.
Okay.
You looking for comments?
Yes, always.
Please, right?
I know security is a huge thing in the world. Everybody's worried about security.
Yeah.
I don't know how the world lived, how we got this far without it for all these years. Cut it out.
Well, I think
That's a third of your cost, and that is doable.
What did you said cut it out?
Yep. I'm just.
I know, can I just ask a question?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know any workplace, and I'm not in a secure workplace, but I don't know where my husband works. He has an access key. He has a guard at the front gate, and this is for a shoe company. So you have precious investments in these schools, and we have teachers and work staff, God forbid. And granted, we don't need a NASA level of security, but there has to be some sort of protection there. That's.
And not that you're old-fashioned.
Places where I can help you.
Yeah, and it's not that you're old-fashioned, but we also have to understand the current reality. So our children, think about our students in our schools, they grew up, the only thing they know is about school shootings. When I was a kid, we had bomb threats all the time. There was never really a bomb. Bomb threats, kids would make bomb threats, and we would all have to evacuate the school. No one was actually getting shot in school.
We had to get under desks so we just lived through a nuclear holocaust.
Yeah, that's true. But there was.
Right. I made a point, I'm sorry, I'm a little passionate on this, sorry. I made a point at our last meeting, my son, who's a junior now, he was in 4th grade when Sandy Hook happened. This has been his whole school environment. So it's just little things that can help. Unfortunately, it is the society we live in, reality, so.
Any other questions or comments? Are we allowed to take comments from the,
I just want to thank you for your hospitality this evening.
thank you.
You beat me to it, David.
It's
gonna-
Presentation.
Yeah, thank you for hosting and for your presentations. To our colleagues as well in Hamilton.
And with that, I would move for a motion from the Hamilton Committee to adjourn.
We did have one more agenda item. I would say the most important agenda item. How are we going to work together to ensure that all 3 budgets pass? This is not an official tagline, but when I think about Hamilton Wenham, I think about 2 towns, 1 community. And I really do get that sense. And I know that you asked tough questions tonight, but that's your job, just like it's my job to present to you what the needs are. The real question I think I would like to know is how are we going to continue to work together so that we can all be successful?
I think we need to see the outcome of your continuing internal discussion.
I think we should continue to stay in touch and contact, continue to meet, and share with each other the things that are evolving, even our budget proposal. I'm going to make an official budget proposal on Monday night, and that will change between then and town meeting. So we'll continue to keep you apprised of how that evolves as well. While the conversation at times, Gene, may have been adversarial, I don't think anybody here is adversaries. So I want us to all feel that way. It's just, it ain't easy.
It's not easy, I know.
Do we want to schedule another meeting? So we have 2 capital subcommittee meetings Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, then the following Tuesday.
Yeah.
The final budget votes on February 12th.
Right?
Number 12.
Do we want another joint meeting before town meeting?
Because we also have another school committee meeting too. So we have the working group on Tuesday, we have a school committee on Wednesday, and the following Tuesday and Wednesday. Ooh, that's loud.
So the school committee will vote on the budget on February 12th.
Correct.
I think our staff and our liaisons, FinCom and Board of Selectmen folks, will probably need a week or so to digest that and try and figure out what we can do in Scramble. Maybe sometime a week after the 12th to get together again and kind of talk about what we've been able to come up with and what strategies we might have for how we present this.
I think that's February vacation.
Yeah, starting February.
So,
15th, 14th.
We're here.
I'm here.
When are you sending your warrants again?
We closed the warrant to new articles on February 10th, but again, opening the warrant and closing the warrant just means that we don't add anything to it. We can change the language of stuff within it after the 10th. We'll go to the printer with the warrant, probably the beginning of April probably the beginning of March is when we have to have everything tied up, because the FinCom has to meet and make their recommendations on the warrant articles, on the budgets, and it's for us to be able to send it to the printer, so.
When do you go to the printer? Sorry.
Well, we go the middle of March, but they're going to need at least a week and a half, 2 weeks to be able to have their votes and give us their final recommendations for both the warrant and then the book of recommendations. So, I'd say by the first week in March, we have to be all in agreement how we're going to go forward.
Okay.
It would be the end of February for us.
Yeah, February 25th, the warrant closes for us, and we go to the printer the beginning of March as well, so.
And I think, as Anthony mentioned earlier, with FinCom and BOS still have a fair bit of work to do on the Wenham budget side, operating and capital, and we'll be wrapping that up in earnest in the next few weeks. I mean, it's been ongoing, but we certainly look forward to any updates from administration and school committee, subcommittee, and obviously we're always willing to meet. Finding time is doable.
I'd say let's shoot for another meeting similar to this, somewhere mid to late February, probably, and maybe the chairs and administration can kind of all talk, and we can figure out with our boards and committees when's best.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
Perfect.
And just before we kind of close, is there any, I know there's a handful of people, mostly school committee in the audience, do the other members have anything to add to tonight's conversation, or want to put in any points, or?
Not as a school committee member, but as a parent and a taxpayer.
Peter, will you come to the mic so people in the audience or on TV can hear you?
there's no money to look at it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Pete Walczyk, common spelling.
Want to start using that?
WOLCCOK, 112 Main Street. I just had a question, a comment and a question. One was a comment about the class size. I had a chance to get the wonderful opportunity to teach in this district for 4 years. And the class sizes can't, the classrooms, physical size of the classrooms can't support more students than we have. I'd say they're maxed out 22, 24. If you start trying to put more students in there, that increases the quality of their education. The labs are just not big enough, middle school classrooms are not big enough, high school classrooms are not big enough. The spaces in the elementary schools are just not designed for the learning that the students need for this 21st, to be ready for the 21st century. Second, I need a history lesson. I've only been in the district for 11 years now. And I've just heard about many, many opportunities to expand the tax base beyond the backs of the property taxes. I'm just wondering why the town is so resistant to opportunities like that. I know we missed out on doing the bio labs. I don't know the history of any of these. I know we missed opportunities with Penguin Hall, Whole Foods, marijuana. I'm just wondering why the town is so resistant to expanding our income streams, our revenue streams, beyond just taxpayers. I need a history lesson. I just don't know why we can't have a facility like Cherry Hill, so close to Beverly Airport. Corporations are constantly looking for space like that, so close to an airport outside the city. I was wondering if someone could just give me a history lesson why we're resistant to that as a community.
I'm not sure whether you're talking about Wenham or Hamilton or both, or I can only speak to Wenham.
Having taught the district for 4 years, I never considered Wenham separate towns. I know that runs a lot of people the wrong way, but I see it as one community, and the students don't see themselves as a Hamilton or Wenham resident. They see them, they always say Hamilton, Wenham. So I guess it either way.
Well, just in Wenham, I've been a resident for 43 years. I'm not sure whether it's resistance as much as we have open space. There's been open space studies done in the past, and we're going to undertake a new planning document in the future. And I wouldn't disagree with you of economic opportunities for the space that we have in Wenham and how can we best use it. I was talking with one fellow 4 or 5 months ago, and my understanding is that New England Biolabs, as an example, produces some significant revenue for the town of Ipswich. And we do have open space. I think it needs to be addressed. There has been competition, if you will, about how to use open space, maintaining it as opposed to developing it. But I think it is something we need to put on the table in the town of Wenham. I can't speak for Hamilton.
I'd say Hamilton is in a similar situation. We have a love for open space in the community, which makes it part of the character of Hamilton and the love that why people come and move to town. But we've just done some preliminary master planning documents with our planning board, and it seems that we only have about 7 or 8% of land in town that's actually developable. A lot of the land is in conservation or chapter lands, and that's a big burden on the taxpayers. With all the chapter lands, it adds about 2.3% to our taxes, paying for that open space in chapter. So there's been a resistance for development, but even if we do look at a pro-development way in the future, we're still only able to develop a very small percentage of town that's actually developable. So it's kind of a catch-22. We like the open space, but we're really paying a premium for it.
But I can give you a bit of contemporary knowledge, not historic, that we recognize the need, as Anthony indicated, to find revenue sources and by development. And we're going to try to concentrate on commercial development to the extent we have the land and the opportunity. So we are mindful of the need to do that.
been a lot of talk about making sacrifices, common sense solutions, coming to grips with this, that it's unsustainable. When we look at 84% of our budget comes out of property taxes, all that echoes that we have to find other solutions, other sources of income. Otherwise, if we start cutting services, increasing class sizes, and the quality of our education goes down, we're no longer a go-to district. And now we're in a death spiral, property taxes drop. So it just exasperates the problem. That's how I'm looking long term. Thank you very much.
Now?
Yes. No, go ahead.
I would ask for a motion from the Hamilton.
Sorry.
You have something to say?
I have some notes that I'll probably reach out to most of you guys with 101. David Polito, 154 Coxwell Road, Lionel. I want to thank everyone for coming here. I really want to thank Vinny and Julie for taking this in a new direction this year. One thing I really want to make clear to everyone this year is, one, this is a new direction. Two, we had 2 new administrators come in to a very tough fiscal situation. One thing that Alex said that I want to touch base with you a little bit offline is, if we're looking at that 5.9% increase over last year, that's not a real number, right? So to compare that 5.9 to the 13 that's on the table right now, that's not a direct one-to-one comparison, because we're forgetting about that $600,000 rollover really makes that more of a 7.9%, and then to find out that we were sort of 2.3% under budget makes that a 10.3% growth. And then you take that all aside, and then what's being proposed this year is actually 8%, right? So it's actually right in line with that. That's what we mean when we're talking about having a corrective year, right? Because we can't ignore that actually happened. We are coming to this table fully understanding that that's not sustainable. So sort of getting that feedback back, we get that. What I do love to hear is, for the first time, now I grew up here and left for a little while, and I've been back for a little while, but for the first time in my time here, my time serving on these boards, I'm actually hearing multiple boards saying, we realize that we have to increase revenue in this town. I've heard it here and there offline in private conversations, but I've actually never heard it all sitting around the same table before. And that's where this community is going to grow. And that's where we're going to realize that we can put a stop to this unsustainable growth that's not unique to us, but what is unique to us is the size of the burden that is placed on the homeowners, and that I can really appreciate us actually doing the work. Again, thank you for the extra work you put in. I can't tell you how much work they've done to actually get these numbers, so we're talking about real numbers. So this doesn't happen again, right? The hard work we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks, excuse me, the capital committee going back, right, really working with Vinny and Julie even more, right? There's going to be some hard conversations, right? Because there's no bloat in this budget. There hasn't been bloat, and some numbers have actually sort of been faked to get us here. I don't want to say that meaning in a negative way, but it's caught up to us, right? Having these conversations, having this here, and then continuing to work after we approve the budget, after we go to town meeting, is what's actually going to keep this moving forward, getting those numbers down to a more sustainable level, right? And it end up sort of affecting all of us as taxpayers. So thank you for coming here. I don't know how many of you guys saw my blood pressure rising over there. It was very, you guys know me for the most part. I love to talk. It's very hard for me to sit in the background and not be able to talk. But thank you for coming out tonight. So I appreciate it.
Go ahead, Alex.
I move that
I make a motion that the Wyndham Finance Committee adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
I move that the Hamilton Wenham School Committee adjourn at 9:51.
Second.
All in favor?
Motion for Hamilton.
To a party once.